communicate policy messages. And what was clear is that in most cases, researchers are not the best when it comes to communicating with non-researchers. But that doesn't stop us from communicating. We need to find the right messengers for the evidence that is generated. But most important are the platforms for engagement. For the majority, those platforms are obscure, they are not known. Where do you go to meet a policymaker so that you can share with them the evidence you are generating? So what we are talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is breaking the silos. It's taking the knowledge that we are generating to the people that are most affected by the problem. And there cannot be a worse off continent than this very continent where this conference is being held. If we are not careful, we'll be left behind, but the opportunities are plenty. What's going to be different going forward? We need to find innovative ways of equipping those most affected by the problems with the evidence that we have been dialoguing on at this conference. There are novel tools. Yes, there's social media, it's taken Africa by storm. But more important, those most affected are the youth. I'm happy to see in our panel, there is young life, so there is hope. But I think we have to do more. We have to bring in the youth into agriculture. We have to bring in youth into the private sector. We need to bring in the youth into government. We need to bring the youth into farming, because that's what has to happen different. But more important, we need to approach headstrong those wicked problems that are the new currency for change. And I was happy in this conference where we touched on complex issues like malnutrition, complex issues like climate change, and then really looking at the nexus between these complex issues and the agenda of security and food security. So going forward, I see an opportunity for taking SDG 17 head-on and saying, when we convene the next conference, who should we have in the room? What's our narrative that will be compelling for private sector engagement? What's our narrative that will be compelling for governments to come and be accountable for how they are leading in the sector, in the agriculture sector and natural resources sector? What is the narrative for the youth? What is the narrative, particularly in Africa, for our women who are the backbone of the agriculture economy in most countries? But most important, the farmers. What is it that we are bringing as new knowledge that will leave them better off? So in those few words, I believe partnerships, policy are key, and it's important that we tie the string across all our streams of dialogue to make sure that we can contribute to better partnerships and a better policy environment where everybody who has a stake in the business of food security is allowed a platform and voice to make a better world by contributing to policy development. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that thought-provoking inputs and insights. There was one of the presentations, I think, where the presenter put up the question, who is doing what to whom and why? And I think what was missing on that question was, and who cares? Because when you think about the caring component, then you start making it a much more inclusive process and probably answer some of the questions that Lindiwe has challenged us about the narrative, the platforms, the ways of engaging, and effectively building trust across these multiple stakeholders who are affected by food security. So moving on to inclusiveness, our second panelist, Dr. Michelle Mbocho-Chouwo, is going to give us her insights using a gender lens and an inclusiveness lens. And this is gender not as gender equals women, but gender as a social construct of power relations amongst people. So Dr. Michelle is a development economist working in the multidisciplinary framework of capabilities in human development. She's worked at ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, where she's contributed to a broader gender equality for livestock and agricultural development. She's extensively worked on CAADP issues, the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, to ensure systematic gender mainstreaming and inclusiveness. And recently, for all her effort and going into another platform where she's really going to make a difference, she's joined AWARD, the African Women in Agricultural Research and Development, and is the Deputy Director for Programs. So Michelle is going to give us insights from a gender and inclusiveness lens. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Just following Lindiwe, it has been an exciting 4 days of really thrilling discussions on our research efforts, on the emerging policy issues, and possible pathways towards food and nutrition security in our continent and even globally. This conference has highlighted that while food security is indeed a global issue, that's what we've been hearing again during these 4 days, there is no universal silver bullet to that issue. As such, we have agreed that most of the practical options that we are developing have to focus on locally driven solutions that are very much context-specific and inclusive. We all know here that about 800 million people in the world are still hungry and food insecure. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 2 has also clearly articulated that if we want to achieve food security and reduce and probably end hunger, we must change how we grow, we share, and we consume food. It's also no secret, and someone really put it very clearly here, I think on the second day, that while 100 million of people are sleeping hungry in certain parts of the world, more often now, and even in our African continent, another 100 million of people have more than enough to eat, and food is wasted everywhere. So how can we then continue to develop, and that's what we've been discussing here, systems that will utilize surplus on one hand in one or another area for scarcity in other areas. I'm really excited that we've been able, during that conference, to really try and address how we can connect the pathways among the actors to achieve food and nutrition security. We have heard in different presentations how underutilized food can be strategic in generating food security, and this, if we can be very intentional, if we can actually make intentional efforts to develop those underutilized food value chain. We've also talked and hear a lot about the urban food systems and how they can be levers for sustainable development and human well-being. Now we've also got a couple of discussions around gender equality, and we all are aware here that this gender equality is about equal opportunities, economic participation, power dynamics, decision-making, and all regardless of the fact that we can be men or women, and we can belong to disadvantaged or advantaged communities. We also all know the challenges attached to achieving gender equality. We've heard about, again, lack of women resources, access to resources, power relationship, time use, role and responsibilities, culture, and status of our values, aspirations, and needs. And we know that all these factors have serious consequences on how we produce food, how we share it, and how we consume it. Research continues to demonstrate the importance of gender in food and nutrition security. Here again, we've had some experts fleshing out issues around gender equality, but also strategies that could work to strengthen the connection between gender equality in agriculture, food, and nutrition security. We've also heard about a couple of interventions continuing to focus on women's social and economic empowerment and capacity building. And all this is really great. However, all these efforts, as I'm looking at them, I still feel, I'm feeling we are still talking about the gaps that continue to persist and hinder different processes, including processes towards food and nutrition security. Why is this still the case? I believe that there are still a lot of missing links in our debate on gender equality and how it affects food and nutrition systems. Some of these aspects, as I reflect, I think can be summarized in 4 points. How we continue to frame the conversation around the contribution of men, women, in agricultural research and development, both as individual and group, and who is actually involved as we are talking about actors to deal with issues around gender equality. We've been talking a lot about women empowerment interventions, and we are doing great in that area. But what exactly do we want to achieve? For example, there is a lot that is being done around training women. But after those trainings, what do we want to see? How do we actually track what happens after our interventions? What impact, what outcomes do we see from the efforts that we are having on the ground? More than 3 decades later, we are still ticking the boxes with very limited coordinations of our efforts to critically analyze gender equality trends and adapt our solutions. When our interventions target only specific groups of people, and in most cases, target women as a group, and most of the time, very out of the context these women operate, are these interventions not in some way perpetuating the inequality that we are talking about? How are we, or do we want to position ourselves to address the unintended consequences of such actions? How do we implement interventions targeting not only specific individuals, specific groups of people, but also the context within which they operate and they exist? Ladies and gentlemen, I think the future of food is bleak if we can continue treating the symptoms of emphasizing some actors and leaving some players in the food system behind. We need to build an agricultural sector that will not only feed our people, but one that can actually lift them out of poverty. A system where all actors involved in agriculture can fully participate, each and everyone in his role, is what we need. And this is what we want to call inclusive food systems. Individual women, men, youth, the research community, development partners, policymakers, academia, we all have a role to play. And there is need for us to coordinate our efforts to achieve gender equality and food security. We need to ensure that we intentionally identify the opportunities to constructively engage all actors at appropriate stage. We not only need coordination among the actors, we need to harness and invest in potential of these actors. And this is required both at the personal and institutional level. And one example that I can take will not be something else than a word, which is the African Women in Agricultural Research and Development, where I think we've started with the understanding that working towards gender equality and agricultural development needs change at 3 levels: at the individual level, at the institutional, but also the surrounding environment. Over the last decade, we have been investing in individual scientists, and particularly women, through our award fellowship program, and we've reached nearly 500 women so far from 16 African countries who have benefited from that unique career development opportunity. So this is our flagship initiative, which has seen a couple of women scientists develop groundbreaking innovations as a result of the opportunities and capacity they gained during the program. We've also been working with more than 1,000 individual scientists, men and women, who have benefited from different training courses, focusing on different skills, building different skills, from leadership, mentoring, science writing, technical gender skills. But I think we also realize, as I was saying, that we are missing something. And this is how we build that capacity, and we make sure that the fellows, as they go back to the institutions, they can actually operate in an environment that is conducive to a research that will address the needs and the priorities of the people on the ground. So with this, I will want us to reflect on the 4 days, especially that I've not seen much of the contribution coming from gender, but there have been some, and ask ourselves, is it worth it? The personal investment that we are putting, the hours of travel across the continent to come here, and then we ask ourselves, do we want to meet again next year to still be talking about challenges that women face in some different areas across the continent and even beyond? Or do we want to agree here that when we meet next, we'll be able to be talking about how we are adapting our solutions and how we are scaling them up, not only for the women, but also the people they live with, the context within which they operate. So can we say that food and nutrition security is night? I want to say that yes, indeed the future is bright, but we will just see this brightness if we are really able to structure an inclusive and focused approach, not only to our hard science, but also the social issues, including gender-related issues, beyond a group of individuals, but to the systems within which they operate to ensure that we are actually food secure. With this, I want to say thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It took me back to a project I was involved in Johannesburg from the private sector point of view, where we developed a school feeding program, and we were doing breakfast feeding into a particular area, 13 primary schools. When the holidays came, one of the problems with bosses is that they tend to give you instructions without any logic as to why they decided to do that. So we did a PR event, and the CEO went out to visit the projects. Of course, he did the stakeholder consultation, and one of the very bright principals, they said, oh, sir, I'm really worried about these children. During the holidays, they won't be having their breakfast. Can you do something about that? So I found myself having to put together a food parcels distribution program, which some people think is a good idea. We put it together, we did our nutritional assessments, we gave formulas of how they could use this over a period of time, appropriate portion sizes and everything, and went out to check 2 weeks into the month what was happening. Food was finished because what effectively happens, which is what Michelle was talking about, is at the household level, there is no understanding of how to have enough food. So what we had given for a month was finished in a week. We came to understand that the ratio between starch and proteins that were as part of the package were used in a way that people wanted to use. We were exposed to the fact that because you had child-headed households, they were opening cans and sort of eating half of the can of baked beans and leaving the other half, so you immediately introduce all sorts of other problems. So I think that there's something to be said about understanding what are the interactions that happen at a household level that can actually consolidate whatever happens outside of the household and bring all these different players together. Needless to say, the pilot finished and it wasn't repeated again because we were not really solving a problem, we're creating another one. But that also raises this whole paradox between overweight and malnutrition, which effectively can happen within a very short space of time. Again, these kids would take the food parcels and then they go to the second food aid, whatever, when there's some project where they're dishing out food, and they go to a third one. So before you know it, kids are almost overeating through donated food and not necessarily eating a good balanced diet. So there's something at the village level, at the community level, that we probably need to be applying our minds to. And I think that will bring inclusiveness to root in our society. So, wicked problems. We've kind of gone from policy to inclusiveness, and now we're going to get into that really broad level of inclusiveness called the geopolitical space. The next person who's going to speak to us and share her insights is Professor Molly Yan. She leads the Global Alliance of Research Organizations focused on building and testing modern knowledge systems for sustainability. She's going to share with us her perspectives on the wicked problems, and she's also going to look quite critically at what the implications of the technology and innovation, some of which we heard about in this week, mean for food security in the long term.
Thank you. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here. And I have to start with a salute. I have to start to a salute to every single one of you out there, every single one of us, because I have found this conference very exciting. And each one of you has come with a passion, with a focus, and we've shared that. And so I would actually like to just give ourselves a gigantic round of applause, because I think this is a special moment. With special thanks, of course, to our hosts and organizers. Speaking of inclusivity, I'm going to start with a little exercise. Is there anyone in the room under 20 years old? Anyone under 20 in the room? I want you to know I have a 15-year-old researcher on my team. Would anybody under the age of 30 stand up? Okay, this is our future, everyone. This is it. So thank you for being here. How can we help you? And I'm going to stop there because actually chronological diversity is another crucially important feature of resilient systems, and one that I think is especially relevant for the subject I will be covering, gender as well. By the way, look at our panel, because we don't all think the same way, and that's not only because we're not trained the same way. Increasingly sophisticated science shows we really don't think the same way. What I'm going to show you is that our problem set, I'm a plant breeder, trained as a plant breeder, vegetable breeder, our problem set is now not only recognized by us, and we're a very large and complex community in this room, but it's being increasingly recognized by extraordinarily powerful people who understand that if we fail and how we fail can have consequences of the largest importance for physical security and financial security. So what I'd like to do is introduce first a concept I hear a lot about called the circle of securities. Food security being one of a host of important other securities, and we struggle with these in agriculture and food security because, in fact, they're facets of the same dynamics of underlying systems. And we might call it food security, but I can tell you there are other enormous and complex systems focused on water and energy and physical security, peace and conflict, that find our work incredibly important. Now you might say, oh, that's fabulous. We've been telling them that for decades. But it does require us, I will argue, to up our game in a big way and be ready for a term that is becoming very widely used in my circles called convergence. I will get killed if I don't put this slide up, because one of the features of convergence in the United States government is a new commitment to a traditional, or not traditional, but longstanding agricultural monitoring investment called GeoGLAM. This EOFSAC hasn't even been announced yet, but it's the next 5-year large-scale commitment of funding from the United States, and there are many other large commitments from around the world to improve the tools that we in our community will use for the things we understand to be our job, including crop forecasting and increasingly early warning, strategies to early warning, because people use our research to make operational decisions. One of the most ironic gaps I have faced in my life as a scientist, as a person who supports investments in science, and a person who supports decision makers reaching for science, is the gaps between the research community and the scientific research community assembled here and decision makers can be quite substantial. And so increasingly we're seeing in food security, in part tragically due to the rise of conditions such as famine and near famine, this year of course being a very difficult year with prospects next year also very challenging. This Earth Observations for Food Security and Agriculture Consortium is something you'll be hearing more about from the United States, but it's a deeply networked set of shared nationally based commitments to doing a better job on early warning and leveraging lots of modern technology, including Earth observations, into our forecasts. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to share with you a famous napkin drawing. I hope you all have shared a lot of napkin drawings while you're here together. This is one that comes from quite some time ago, and Michael Carter, who unfortunately had to leave but has been here all week, drew this out for me after an experience that it was extremely instructive to me as a plant breeder. And some of you in the room may have been involved in this. In the early thousands, a Bogoma virus came into West Africa and caused significant reduction in tomato production in West Africa. Many people around the world were mobilized to address this, including my lab and many others. And so we were able to mobilize, as it turned out, existing technology through networks into this challenge in West Africa. The key breakthrough was not some fancy genetically engineered technology. It was something many of us will hold dear, trialing networks. We had existing trialing networks in the region, especially set up, actually, as it turned out, for sorghum. We were able to leverage it for tomatoes. We moved tomato varieties that were on the shelf in industry. We didn't know they would work, but it turned out they did. We restored tomato production very quickly. And I don't think I have a pointer, do I? So, and Michael said, that's fine. But I want you to understand that as a plant breeder, your tool is very limited. So let me speak to this graph in some detail. He said along the lower axis, there's rain, from no rain to plenty of rain. He said, actually, Molly, you plant breeders, if there's no rain, there's no crop, period. We don't have a crop. It doesn't matter how fancy your crop is or your crop is better. There's no crop. And so to meet that dotted line, yield needed to meet human demands. We're relying on things other than crop production. As we get into the place where my technologies are more relevant, let's say limited water, I'm picking abiotic stress as an example in this instance, we plant breeders can adjust the curve in that middle section of the grant. We can move it so that we cover more of the empty space with an abiotic stress tolerant variety. But when we get into periods of sufficient resource, my abiotic stress variety is just the same as your stress susceptible variety. And again, we're back to where my technology innovation is not delivering the whole difference. Well, we all know in some sense each piece of the sky we hold up opportunities that recognize and manage the ways in which consumption can be supported, nutrition can be supported, and financial outcomes can be improved. We have a lot to expect from nutritional technologies and interventions, and those are really different. And I think many talks through this meeting have emphasized they're really different from agricultural instruments, and that's fine. So the last thing I want to emphasize in this talk is the importance of financial technologies, and I especially want to call your attention to that little word down in the right-hand corner of that slide, risk. Because actually for many of us in agriculture, lots of what we do is about a relationship to managing risk. But we as a community, as a scientific and technical community, don't know nearly enough about risk, in my opinion. And so this is a very distinguished guy, he runs a catastrophe modeling company. You may not have known there were such things, but they're terribly important. He argues that, just recently, a focus on food systems in catastrophe modeling is long overdue. Does that sound like good news? It's not. And he has some suggestions, some very specific and sophisticated suggestions about how to leverage very, very advanced methods that have been used for modeling so-called single peril hazards, earthquakes, hurricanes, moving them more into our space related to agricultural production and more broadly the term food systems. A very important point I want to make in this summary is that that creates new demands for data and analytics. It is not repurposing my variety trial data. They need to know new and different things about our subjects, and they analyze them in different ways. So again, a lot of text, I'm going to just fly through it. What most researchers do differently toward food security, and I mean that broadly, in the 21st century when we understand that lots of different kinds of pressures are escalating, we must individually and collectively understand that we are always managing complex systems for multiple outputs as a function of a whole constellation of inputs, some we count and some we don't, under highly dynamic conditions, and I didn't add, with deeply incomplete knowledge. That's our reality. In genomics, molecular biology, we actually had to invent a whole new field to accommodate that, and it was called systems biology. This is the napkin drawing. Agricultural interventions only work when there's a crop, and they work best when there's a market for that crop. And finally, I think many of you in the audience, certainly I in my work, are very committed to not just minimizing the injury we do to the resources we depend on, but restoring them and literally regenerating them as we move forward with agriculture, which literally is the most important way we take care of the terrestrial planet. So people say, what's a food system? I don't know what a food system is. I'm going to show you, this is a picture of a food system from a bank, a very famous and excellent Dutch bank called Rabobank that extends vast amounts of capital into the global food system every year. This just shows trade flows of a few major commodities. And the point is that these trade flows look like trade flows for energy and other commodities, both renewable and not, and in fact reflect something fundamentally important for us to understand in the 21st century. We are on this planet's greatest binge on fossil and water energy ever. And many of the problems we face, from climate change to obesity to active nitrogen where we don't want it, have to do with too much energy being pumped into the Earth system. That's a pretty simple recognition, and it actually is very important when we start to think about risk in agricultural systems and systemic risk more broadly. I just put up here a little picture I drew, actually along, speaking of teenagers, with the amazing teenage mind of my 18-year-old son. for Lloyd's of London, starting in 2014, 2015, they asked, Molly, what are the probabilities of food system shock? We didn't have a name for that. So they work off qualitative scenarios. They don't want to know about 2030. They want to run the year 2018 200 times and see if something happens once. And if it happens once, then they have to deal with it. So I've written a number, or contributed to a number of great literature reports that may or may not be familiar to you, but I'm sorry to say they've had more impact than all my academic publications times. I don't even want to know the multiplier. And have brought me and many others in my network towards an understanding of a research agenda which I submit to all of us may be powerful guides going forward. Obviously, we have a growing global population in what in essence is a closed system. That is a very different understanding from when I was raised in plant breeding school in 1983. I was told, yield, 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 Molly. That's all you need to know. I think it's a little more complicated than that. Recognition of links between local and global food security, health, poverty, social, political instability. This meeting's been all about that. And of course, the dynamics of these systems, increased demand per capita, increased demand by the numbers of us mean trade-offs loom large, and disruptive technology is presenting itself at very large scale without adequate planetary accounting. I'm going to just put a plug in for this report. Several of us at this meeting contributed. Was one of the first to bring these different pieces, food waste, productivity, equity, and a need for some baseline planetary accounting into one view. So who cares? I get a lot of great invitations these days to come and talk about food security and food systems. This is a national energy laboratory in the United States. These laboratories, the one I'm affiliated with, not this one, has twice as much as one laboratory. Its budget is twice as big as all the USDA research investment, period. These are staggeringly outstanding organizations, and they're inviting me to come and tell you things that we care about because energy and water intersect. I get to go to government because government is starting to understand our threats, not only in a development mode, but in a what if we fail? What if we fail locally? What if we fail regionally or nationally? What if we fail globally? And so I wanted to just pick one poster. I don't mean to pick on just one, but I was especially taken by this one. Robust impact evaluation of Brazil's Zero Hunger program. Cecile may be here. And here's her discussions and conclusions. I wanted to just pop this up because I think this is so important and it's such a good place to start our view forward. We show evidence of zero hunger, this is in Brazil, having a positive impact on food production, most noticeably on increasing protein production. Okay, now we're getting to some significant statements. There is less evidence of socioeconomic and health impacts, with only limited reductions in poverty and no effects on child malnutrition or infant mortality, suggesting that increases in food production are not reaching the people most in need. The fact that we also find evidence of a negative environmental impact of zero hunger is a concern. And finally, the nuanced, heterogeneous impacts of zero hunger presented here and their possible causal mechanisms are vital to consider when the program is rolled out to, this says countries in sub-Saharan Africa, but I'd argue all of us. Because in the United States, and I hope this is also one of the really strong themes of this conference, we have significant food insecurity, which is not the same as it is anywhere else on earth, but this is a group of high school students. They were in the, quote, worst high school in America's most segregated city, Milwaukee, happens to live near, or be near me. We have turned that school into a high school of agricultural sciences, and this is a very familiar thing in the United States, these blue jackets. Typically, they're worn by rural youngsters. They've been considered out of fashion for about since I was a kid. It's the future farmers of America. But we're seeing resurgence, and I love the focus on youth and schools, because these students are coming into a new kind of high school in the United States. I hope we have one in every single American city. They're wearing these blue jackets proudly. They're waving to you. They're so happy you're here. I'll come back and tell them all about you. The truth about these students is that many of them are working. They're in the 9th grade, 13, 14, 15 years old. They're working as many as 8 years behind grade level already in the United States. The call I had last week from the school is that they don't have enough to eat in the school. And the question is exactly the question that was just brought out before my talk. But for the first year, these students showed in a grand tradition in America, the Wisconsin State Fair, and one of those lambs is named Ace. So I'm going to close because I was told to address geopolitical issues and problems, and I think they start right in that last picture. The hope does. We've got lots of wicked problems. That's a well-established term for decades. I teach a class in systems thinking. And because there aren't very many classes in systems thinking, I make the students, this is a classic teacher trick, right? For all you teachers, you make the students do your work for you. Their course assignment in systems thinking is to come up with these are seniors, to come up with a systems thinking curriculum for freshmen. And this is one of my favorite pictures from last year. One of our students decided that hope was such a powerful force in systems that he needed to make a whole lecture about the ways in which hope influences systems very practically. And I can tell you, because I support many different types of analytical communities, mostly looking at really bad things, advance of violent non-state actors and extremism and geopolitical, all that bad stuff, is let's not underestimate the power of something that is the opposite of wicked, maybe radical hope. And so I'd like to close just highlighting 3 massive game changers that I think I have not heard enough about in this conference, but I hope you will leave with these in mind, because these are the things I get asked about all the time. Convergence of technology and acceleration of invitation. Genome editing is being considered a huge threat, huge opportunity. Lots of information about food and risk, and of course these things intersect. But information creates certain types of power and vulnerability. And the dynamics of those power and vulnerabilities, Michelle has highlighted in particular, I think they're crucially important. It also is bringing massive influxes of various types of capital, and it's also pretty ignorant. I regularly hear calls for fundamental system redesign. We heard of the conundrum of food security from Ken Giller. I'm seeing the wildest stuff being proposed for how we're going to feed ourselves. And I think while it's left field for many of us who are used to seeing plants in the ground or livestock in a field, we can't ignore those things. And finally, I'm sorry to say, geopolitical stresses, financial and physical risk cannot be underestimated in this century, and food is increasingly coming front and center. So I'm going to just close by saying, ultimately, equity, I think, lies at the heart of our success. And I thank you for your attention and the opportunity to provide these remarks to all of you as a reflection of what we've done together.
Wow. Thank you, Molly. Thank you very much. What she doesn't know is I'm trying to create space for people to ask her clever questions so that she gets another round at sharing her vast experience. But I think what Molly brings to the table actually is the fact, what I sensed in listening to you is, geez, we're a pretty isolated community. There's this whole world out there, lots of moving parts, and we kind of operating in a very relatively safe space and hoping the world can see what we're doing. And yet, essentially, I think your circle of the different securities, essentially there are a lot of people who care about food security, not necessarily from the perspectives that we bring, but more from how it connects to all the other insecurities and securities. I know when we're preparing for the session, Molly made a lot of mention on the interest of the I'm going to call it the traditional global security world, being interested in what happens with food security in countries, because it is a source of and potentially used in areas of conflict. And because we want peace in this world, it becomes an essential theme that they must get to understand. But again, lots of things that you've raised here makes me think of how it's actually quite appropriate that we're meeting in Cape Town. I mean, I love the continent in its entirety. I'm not particularly I'm not always one of those people who rushes to Cape Town because I think there's lots of other wonderful places in South Africa. But I think we're meeting in Cape Town where there is a real water problem. So it's like in our faces on a day-to-day basis. And I think it just, for me, sharpens how real some of these problems are, and how when they catch up with you, issues of climate change, everybody is just floundering. And I think the Cape Town community, it's quite fascinating to see how they have adapted to this water crisis. Some of them still hope that they can have a hotline, and they're going to change their mobile service providers, a hotline to someone who'll just generate rain. But the other part of it is that South Africa is a microcosm of all the wicked problems that the world is facing. We have gone through this challenge in the last 20, how old are we now? 20 whatever, we're over 21 years. Trying to deal with what you raise here, the need for game changers. The current lingo in South Africa is radical economic transformation, but essentially looking for something that's going to dramatically shift the structural economy. Convergence, you need to bring people together across different races, across different classes. And then, of course, it always involves trade-offs. And I think that the way you summarize that, for me, becomes, it's a very, very useful insight. So, I do not want to take away from the time, and we'd like to open up for, preferably questions, but comment as well. And because we're in the last session, we are going to try and limit people to really brief, precise comments, but we'd really like to open up and have some participation. So the question to you all is the one that I posed to the panelists at the beginning. So what is new about this conference, or what should be new going forward, especially in the context of the African continent? So open up for questions, comments. Yes. Oh, you go to the mic, sorry. Yes, okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't. Yeah, let's have the gentleman here in front. Yep. Yes?
Okay. I'm Richard Strange. I'm the editor of the journal Food Security. What has come through to me in this conference is that fundamentally we're not very good at growing plants. Therefore, I would make a plea for more extensionists and very well-trained extensionists who will be able to instruct farmers how to get far better yields, especially on this continent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that contribution. Should we go?
Thank you. I am Hugo Melgar Quiñones at McGill University in Canada. And I think this has been a tremendous event. I do share the opinion about some voices being missed in terms of what are the experiences of people who are facing food insecurity or who are perhaps successfully fighting food insecurity. I have a comment for Professor Jan on her data from Brazil. The Brazilian Institute for Statistics, the National Institute for Statistics, has applied for a number of years an instrument that is called Escala Brasileira de Insegurança Alimentar, which is an experience-based food security tool, and which shows great advances during the times of the program Zero Hunger on the experiences or fighting the experiences related to food insecurity, a situation that is unfortunately changing rapidly in a negative direction in the last couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So both good and bad lessons from Brazil. Do you want to comment on that?
I'll just say, but the importance of metrics, relevant metrics, is is fundamental to your comment, and I think it's fundamental to our ability as a community to hold ourselves accountable for the types of improvements and the kinds of both intended and unintended or collateral consequences. I hate to call them consequences, but actions that get set up when we intervene in systems in the various more traditional ways. Being able to track that is so powerful, which was one of the reasons I was so excited to see that poster.
Okay.
Or even attempting to track it.
Yeah. The first comment was really about productivity increases. Would any of you like to take that one on?
Not really. I'll just say as a plant breeder, that remains really important. It will always remain important. And there's a lot of opportunity for innovation, especially as some of these new techniques, not just applied to plants, but microbial communities and livestock. So tailoring interactions important to agriculture become more established in the next decade.
Linda? Okay. Right, so productivity increases. Yeah, I once went to a jojo farm. Jojo is what's a jojo? A pest. A pest farm. We're breeding pests. In South Africa, we call them jojos. So it was quite a fascinating experience to walk into this really creepy place, but very useful for IPM. Right, any more questions from, I'm looking to this side. Oh, sorry, over there, this side. I have the lights in my face, so please apologize.
Listening to the presenters, but also the previous 3-4 days, I think the issue of population is coming back onto the agenda as if Malthus came back to life yesterday. And of course, scientists over the years disapproved Malthus, and food increased and fed the population without necessarily meeting the population crisis that he had prophesied about. But we seem again to say that the current levels of population increase are not sustainable, and indeed they are not. And one of the speakers, I think yesterday, said that the magic bullet in women education, educate women, perhaps we shall reverse population growth. But we've been talking about women education for many years, and I don't see it growing rapidly to cope with the growing population. So if the current population growth is outstripping food increase, and the women education that seems to be a solution is not growing that fast, so what is the solution? I seem to go back without a solution to the population crisis. Is Malthus becoming very relevant again today than he was before? What is the issue?
Yeah, an interesting comment. I had an afterthought after that discussion around population growth, because I think somebody said the real problem are the people who came before this current generation. So that's why we have so many young people, not that they necessarily are having many children. So there's a, what did you call it, a chronological dimension to it. But anybody would like to comment?
Well, I can comment as one of the baby boomers. I think for me, it goes back to the way we address these wicked problems. Education can't be the only solution. We need a broader toolbox of solutions to address the challenge of population. And I think one of the biggest challenges has been the issue of energy. I mean, what do you do in a situation where you can only be productive during daylight times? It means in any day, you can only apply 8 to 10 hours. The rest, you have to be not only non-productive, but sleeping in bed because you have no light. So part of the rural development agenda should really be embracing the energy issue. And if I look at the African context, it's no surprise that under the new dispensation of the African Development Bank, where agriculture and food security has taken center stage, the first of the 5 high fives is Light Up Africa. And for as long as we don't address that energy challenge, we are not only going to be lacking in terms of light, we cannot process our food, we cannot mechanize, we cannot do so many other things that are required, that require energy, and hence the population boom. yes, it was the baby boomers, but I still want to believe that in the not so educated communities, part of the contribution, particularly for rural communities, has been lack of energy. Thank you.
Michelle?
Yeah. Hello? Okay. Yeah, just wanted to follow up on Lindiwe and say, again, that's what we were talking about. Why will we want to educate women? Are they having those babies themselves? I think it's a joint process.
I remember
so
that.
why are we wanting to educate women, and where are we putting the men who are also part of the process to make sure that all together they can make this decision? And this is what we see in Africa. A lot of these plannings are all full of women. And actually, when you ask the women, they say, my husband wants kids. He needs kids. So what are the kind of results we want out of it if we cannot have a process of all who are involved to really think through and know what will be the benefit of planning the birth? I think we need to really think through that.
Thank you for that comment. Actually, when the comment was made, there were a couple of young ladies behind me who also said, what about the men? When are they going to be educated? Because, exactly as you say, Michelle. But I think it goes back to the point you were making about thinking of the societal unit for all of these interventions and having an integrated, a participative process, an inclusive process. We have more questions on that side. I think we'll take those 3 questions and then we'll come back to the panel.
I'm Bernard Apple from Tel Aviv University. My question, I've been very much influenced, or I like the model that Molly put up there of the envelope. We're told that there's really enough food presently in Africa and in the world, so that's not a problem. We don't have to increase productivity today. But all efforts are, it looks to me like we're in that lower part of the curve that Molly said, if there's no rain, if there's no water, whatever you're doing makes no difference. It seems to me somewhere we're in that place of no water, and the question is, what is this no water, that we have to get out of to be able to push the lower end of the population, which has poor nutrition and are food insecure. What do we have to do to push them up into that place where now our programs can start having an influence?
Thank you. At the back there?
Thank you so much to the panel. Laura Pereira from South Africa. I had a question about metrics, and in particular when we're thinking about the food system as a complex system, food security as a wicked problem. But we still tend to rely on things that we can measure quantitatively, put numbers to. That's what we tend to emphasize, especially when we're talking to policymakers. So hence why productivity, yields, etc., numbers become really important. And we start to lose focus on some of the more important qualitative aspects. So Lindiwe was mentioning the role of social theater, for example, and those kinds of interesting methods and ways of engaging with communities that are really important from a knowledge generation as well as an education perspective. But how do we then translate that to policymakers, to decision makers, when we can actually, they want the numbers out there, and sort of trying to explain that it's a much more nuanced and sort of complex problem that we're facing. How do we start to actually break down those barriers and have a really rich conversation about the complexity that food is?
Yes?
I am Celine Termote from Biodiversity International Kenya, and I just wanted to thank the last presenter for bringing a whole slide on hope, because according to me, this is really important. As scientists, we really tend to look too much at the problems, and we are trying to fix the problems. But I think, and especially for those of you that are doing a lot of field work together with the communities in the field, as I've been doing for 15 years now, I think it's important if we go to those communities that we talk about hope and what are their aspirations and where do they want to go, and then start thinking about what are the little step-by-step things that we can start doing to reach those aspirations. And maybe if we start doing so, it will also help us to think out of the box and help us thinking about how we can redesign the food system.
Yes, thank you for that. Right, back to my panelists. Food availability, hope, metrics.
I'll take up the one on metrics since I was mentioned on that one. And I think we continue to plan on wrong data because no one wants to invest in data collection. And it has become fashionable to just quote some references which we all know are not credible, but we build our hypothesis on that because that's what everybody is doing. And I think if really we wanted to be accountable, we would go back to what I keep on saying is go back to those most affected by the problem, make them understand why we need the data, and make them collect the data themselves. It goes back to the issue of trust. If one of the areas, the wicked problems that we are trying to address is the issue of nutrition, and yet none of us can account for what we eat. And yet if we invested in just taking a picture of everything we eat and have a central processing place that would collate all this data and feed it back to those who are developing the policies for addressing malnutrition, the world would be a better place faster than when we go back to our traditional method of a printout of a questionnaire, put people under a tree, cook the data, create a hypothesis, come to a conference, report, and it rots on the shelf. So, one, we have not elevated the role of data in planning, particularly in policy processes. But second, we've not used innovative methods to capture. I was excited just last week, I had the opportunity to visit Google, as Google in the Silicon Valley, and one of the interesting things they are now doing, they claim they are not making money out of it, is providing free wireless services in places like, I think, India, all the train stations, you now have free Wi-Fi. What that does is people are now coming to the train station, not to catch a train, but to log on and use free Wi-Fi. But what it does for Google is they get to know you have to plug in your phone number, you have to plug in your gender, you have to plug in your age, and all that is data they then get to process for many other things. And I then go back, Africa has the highest number of mobile phones. So if we want to address the issue of stunting, the issue of malnutrition, the issue of obesity, can't we get clever scientists who have more innovative ways of getting to know what we eat and why we eat it and when we eat it, and invest in developing policies that are evidence-based? So I think we've just made the issue of metrics so heavy, and there is no appetite for investing in that, yet there are innovative ways of collecting data and processing it. So the challenge is out there for the next generation. Get in there and clean up the mess that we caused on data collection, and let's see what would happen if we plan on correct and honest data. Thank you.
Okay. Michelle, do you have a comment?
I think she's just put it up very clearly, because I just wanted to say that looking at the aspect of gender and the data that we have, a lot of it is still very anecdotal. That's one. And we're doing it really like project-based. So we have one project here, we collect data, we go for another project, we collect data, we go. There is no consistency on even the indicators that we are using, but at the end, the results and the findings that we have are very general. Women suffer all over the world. But where are we getting this from? Where are we getting this from if we are looking at very different projects from one region to the other with very different metrics? So what do we want to do about this?
Okay, so metrics seems to be emerging as a theme. Molly, your take.
Let me just be very fast as a as a former policymaker and someone who provides data to policymakers and someone who teaches systems thinking, it really helps in this instance to figure out who is the policymaker, what is the decision, or what are the sets of decisions that particular policymaker can make, and what is the result of those decisions, and tailor the data or the anecdote, which can be even more powerful than data, to the particular demand. And I think we have done, there's lots of room for improvement in terms of justifying how extremely important our work is to decision makers who have only one small slice of the instruments we need to address the overall problem. And I have found as I've taken that challenge apart in more detail, I've frequently been able to deliver very powerful insight to that decision maker and get the decision made the way I want. Let me just mention one class of data that's extremely important on the African continent, but everywhere, that does raise really significant ethical and privacy issues as well as power issues. And that is mobile phone data. There's a very exciting experiment that was conducted, and there may be lots. The one I happen to know about was conducted by the Telecom Orange, connected to a nonprofit called Data Pop Alliance. They aggregated telephone data, discovered even aggregated, it was so powerful and could be so easily disaggregated that some of that work has been discontinued. And so I think as we advance on this data, no data, what's the data, why are we collecting it, we need to be really mindful of the purpose and the power of both what's in the light and what's in the dark.
Okay, I think we're getting some meat. We're giving some meat to this, to this interaction with policymakers in order to create an enabling environment within which we can achieve better success. And some of these seem to be the underlying issues. I deliberately forgotten that I was also a policymaker once. I'll allow for the last two gentlemen who've stood up.
Hi, Kunde Kaiser from the University of Pretoria. And I had a question regarding our understanding of food as part of a complex system and the policies that are sort of connected to that, in the way that agro-food policies are very much incoherent regarding and sort of like working sometimes against each other in sort of regarding the food system outcomes. If we look at that sugar, for example, is still very much subsidized. And then we invest in very much the health outcomes of that sugar subsidization, like the outcome of obesity and so forth. Shouldn't we more connect these dots and develop a common food policy rather than just focusing on specific agro-food policies? And is it even possible to sort of make policies that would make more coherence? Thank you.
I'll come back to you just now. Let's have the last.
Yeah, my comment actually follows on very much, I think. I mean, I raised this idea on Monday morning of this food security conundrum, and I mean, I have the privilege of visiting many different communities in Africa during the year in rural areas as part of the projects we work on, and we're always given such a fantastic welcome. People are so innovative in the field, but they're often really very disadvantaged in terms of the resources that they have to invest. And we have this situation then where we need countries to provide this cheap and nutritious food for the urban poor. So we want that food self-sufficiency, we want that local production. But the rural households, I start to stop calling them farmers because that's part of their diverse portfolio of their livelihood. They don't really have the capacity in terms of the land areas and things to build a proper livelihood. And I don't know what sort of policy advice we can give, actually, to solve this conundrum. I mean, that's what really keeps me awake at night. How do you actually stimulate the production to provide this cheap and nutritious food for the cities that's needed, and at the same time stimulate, if you like, the rural households and give them the opportunity as well to build a livelihood? And that has to, of course, involve people moving away from the land as well, I think.
Complicated issues. Molly took me back into my historical identity, which I sometimes prefer to forget. But a reality check on policy making. Bottom line is decision makers are all individuals who are in those positions of power because they like power. And they will go for what they want. And therefore, the trade-offs that happen at a political level are often very difficult to anticipate. Hence, this moving back towards an evidence-based approach to policy. Otherwise, what ends up happening is politicians or decision makers get lobbied by one or another interest, and then you end up with the conflicts that were raised here about the sugar issue, subsidized sugar plus obesity plus sugar tax. I mean, lack of coherence on that one, but that's a South African experience. But bottom line is you have individuals who are engaged on a continuous basis on trying to position themselves. And somehow, while scientists may not have the ability to engage in that space, understanding what the dynamics are is good, because then you know where to find the entry points and therefore try and influence and get, you know, good research results out into policymaking. We are coming towards the end of the time allocated for this session, so I'm going to ask my very able panel members to give us 2 takeaways from their perspective that I'm sure the rapporteurs are going to pull out into the final statements. This is being a bit egoistical, the power of the mic. So, who would like to start? 2 takeaways.
I'll start by saying I think what we are still lacking is the opportunity to engage on addressing wicked problems. And I'm taking a cue from the question that was asked on the sugar issue. Generally, these are problems that are multi-causal. They are very difficult to define. They have unforeseen consequences. They are not stable. They are always shifting. They are associated with policy failures, and that's why they are a nightmare to policymakers. And they need a framework for many players, partnerships, to participate in solving them. When you look back, in most places, there is no ministry or department of food security. We're looking at agriculture, we're looking at environment, and agriculture is saying produce more. Environment is saying look after the environment, and the consumer is saying affordable, accessible. And then there's the Ministry of Health dealing with other issues, problems that have been caused by the Ministry of Agriculture in the way we produce our food. So, can we find innovative ways of dealing with the wicked problems? But more important, can we educate ourselves that we need to close the gap between agriculture, nutrition, and health? And I think the more time we spend on these complex intersectoral issues, our audience, the policymakers, will get better educated on how to deal with these wicked problems. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to Molly.
Thank you.
2 takeaways.
Takeaways. For me, food security, which has very well-defined specific meaning, ultimately, as we've all pursued it, nests into something that is more accurately represented as public health. And that's broader and encompasses so many of the things we struggle with. I have learned a great deal from nurse statisticians because they're frontline practitioners with conditions that include food insecurity. And I would say we should be ready for what we're asking for, because when we talk to those colleagues that Ken highlighted, which is so fundamentally important to delivering benefits into complicated systems, we often get answers we're not expecting. And I'll say just quickly, the most surprising when I collaborated with nurse statisticians in Cameroon was that instead of the hose or the seed or the whatever it was that we thought that the women farmers that were afflicted with HIV would want, they wanted wigs. And so be ready for some surprises if we really start asking and we really start listening. And some of those surprises may take us some really positive places really fast. So the second thing I want to say is we need a term that's the opposite of wicked problems that has to do with hope. Because I actually have tremendous hope when I see the power of different minds and different classes of action coming together in new ways. I think there are some tremendous breakthroughs if we keep our eye on the goal, which for me is for us as a human family to learn to live well within our means.
Great. Michelle.
Yes, mine will only be one, and this is about coordinating our efforts towards food and nutrition security. If we are planning interventions, we better plan them in such a way that we are actually leaving all our household better off. Instead of trying to solve for some, we've talked about child nutrition, but child nutrition is very much dependent on the household where this child is, the mother-in-law, the father, and all these other people who are part of the household. So if we are going to household to solve the problem of a child, and we are forgetting about the others, we better just leave them. Or if we're going there, let's make their life better for all of them, but not for specific people in those households.
Thank you very much for that. So, first of all, a round of applause to my amazing panel. And then from me, 3 points. One, 2 takeouts and just a comment. The first takeout is, I think what we have at the end of this process is a very rich collection of ideas, of experiences, of questions, and of connections that we've got to treasure. The coming together in this big room, if you're standing here, you really see how big it is and overwhelming. We mustn't lose that. So we need to go back and try and understand what was going on in some of the sessions that we were unable to go to, and therefore think about where the connections are so that we can find some pathways for progress. The second point then is what seems to be coming out largely from the panel is what we need to think about what we can do about connecting with people who are different from us. And I say this at all levels. So working with people who don't work on agricultural productivity, working with people who actually do different jobs, they're policymakers, they take different decisions, working with private sector decision makers whose biggest concern is not what we are concerned about, the return on investment, and working with young people who have a language very, very different from our own. I have been educated, I don't have children, but I have these 2 nieces who've given me a whole new vocabulary. So my final comment comes from their vocabulary. If you don't get it, sorry. This conference has been lit. And I have had such an amazing time. It's been awesome. So safe travels to all of you, for those of you who are not going to be enjoying more of South Africa. Thank you.
And then start traveling back to Pretoria. I'm going to actually ask the group to come to the front to do the farewells and the thank yous. So Evilla Kiddebrain, Sandra Brucer, and Patrick Garon can just please come forward as well. Okay. Well, this was an awesome session. I loved it. I thought the speakers were absolutely fantastic. It was wonderful. It was a lively conference. It was 4 days, 15 symposiums, 4 streams over 3 days. We had 660 people together. We came as strangers. We peeked from our silos. We asked for a future focus. We unpacked the SDGs. We tried to cross our disciplinary borders And I remember a retailer once said at one of the global food safety conferences, this is a borderless world. As retailers, they purchase their products wherever they want, and they move the food the way they want, and they control the food supply chain. So it is true, it is a borderless world, and that's the way we should approach it. In order for us to give that unified, integrated vision for the way to go forward, we heard a few challenges, we heard very important messages. Very importantly, we need to move out of our comfort zones. As scientists, we need to find the right messengers. We need to create a conducive environment where the elephant in the room can engage with industry, the consumer, and the farmer to truly transform our food safety or food system. And the food must be safe. And I hope you all noticed that we've got a listeria outbreak, and I sort of, in a tongue-in-the-cheek, want to say, I told you so. So tomorrow we'll have a listeria workshop in Pretoria, much to our delight. We must all remember we need to engage in policy, and it was very interesting to hear that how the scientists enjoy the policy session, and how some of the policy people said, oh, the scientist, you're quite interesting. And I think that's why we're here, to really share our knowledge and to follow our dream. And I think we all have a dream. I would love to see everyone at least grow their own vegetables. At least once in your lifetime, you have to grow your own lettuce or tomato or carrot. And we also heard, who cares? Well, I care, and you care, and that's why you are still here. But it's not only about growing our food and distributing it. There's also a very important message. It's also about our responsibility. I was glad to hear that we actually put it on the table, population growth, our responsibility in terms of our population, but also the responsibility that resides with every consumer, and that is you and me. And it starts with, how much food do we dish up? How much food do we prepare? How do we plan events such as these, and what happens to the food that we did not consume? And these are important because it's a shared responsibility, and that's the only way we can ever assure food security for all. We heard very important messages from Molly, and I really liked the concepts of trade flows, food systems shock, Molly's circle of security, Michael's napkins, also Robert Moore's catastrophe modeling, and Paul Teng mentioned the whole issue around risk and how we need to look at it. Well, all I can say is, if we think of Mission Mars, if they can go to Mars and send people there and think and develop a strategy to prepare enough food for that mission, surely we can prepare and ensure enough food for all. So the challenge is huge, and I was thinking while I was listening to Molly, I was thinking of the Gaia hypothesis, because you spoke about a closed system. And we used to talk to our students about the Gaia hypothesis and how we are all one. The lungs of the world, the rivers that flow, the energy that flows through the system, the macro and micro ecosystems. And obviously I will think of microbes and typical population density regulatory mechanisms that function in nature, the RNK strategies, and how these microorganisms self-regulate. And why can we as man not do that? It is important to also note the next generation. I thought it was very good to ask the under 20s or under 30s to stand up. And I want to take it a little bit further, and I want to say, well, can all the grandparents stand up? And I'm definitely standing. But yes, and we've got a few. So that's also the future, because it's really in our hand to teach our grandchildren to care, to care for planet Earth, to care for their fellow human beings. We have the wisdom, and I know our own children don't want to know about our wisdom. They've got Google. But our grandchildren might enjoy that. And we love and we care them, and that's perhaps how we're going to change mankind. I want to actually tell you that I feel content. I think life is about being content, having enough, living within our means, and that's a very important message. So for me, this conference was really about good food, nutrient-dense wine. I don't know, Norshat, can I use that term? Smart wine, nutrient-dense smart wine. It was saturated with knowledge, opportunities to interact and move across our borders, our scientific borders. And with that, I'm actually now going to move over to a few other technical issues. We have the Best Poster Prize Award, and I'm actually going to ask Dr. Willeke de Bruin to come forward, and she's going to take that section further.
So on behalf of GAIN, who could not be here today, I'd like to call to the stage the following people. I hope they are still in the audience. Julian Wald, Maria Carlson, Godfrey Mahoke, Emmanuel Kiri, and Boinilo Lefadola. And while they approach the stage, I'll just be reading the titles of their posters. By the way, 70% of the conference delegates voted on the app. We'd like to thank you for doing that. So the names of the posters are as follows. So Julian Wald et al. From the University of Hohenheim, Stuttgart, Germany, in coordination with Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Kumasi, Ghana, produced the poster called Dietary Assessment Using the CIMI Approach, a case study from 3 districts of the Ashanti region in Ghana. The second poster of the 5 was from Maria Carlson et al. From Sweden. And the name of that poster was Bacterial Antagonism Against E. coli 0157H7 on Leafy Vegetables. The third poster from Godfrey Mahoke et al. From the University of Sydney, Australia, in association with the University of Queensland, Australia, and Tanzania Veterinary Laboratory Agency in Tanzania. The name of their poster was Aflatoxin Contamination of Village Grains in Central Tanzania, Food and Agricultural Practices in Relation to Contamination and Exposure Risk. Almost at the last one, we've then got Emmanuel Kiri et al. From Louisiana State University in the United States. And the title of their poster was Effect of Fortified Maize Cowpea Blend on Viability of Lactobacillus plantarum under acid and bile conditions. And lastly, but not the least, Boinilo Lefadola et al. From the University of Pretoria in South Africa, with their poster Food Waste Generation and Prevention in the Transformation Subsystem of a University Food Service Unit, a case study. So I'm going to ask Sandra Broersche to hand over the prize to our winner.
So Elsevier is very proud to award the prize for the best poster to Julian Ward of the University of Hohenheim. And the prize consists of a 2-year subscription to the journal Global Food Security. And we have, of course, an award for Julian.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations,
Thanks.
Julian.
Thanks.
And a small gift. Yeah. And do we also have the runners-up still in the room? Maria Carlson? No? No one else? Jeffrey Magoge? We'll send these certificates. Emmanuel Kiere? Not here. And Ponjuli Levadola. We wish them, we congratulate also the runners-up, and we'll send the certificates to them by mail. Well, thank you. Thanks. To the winners.
Okay, and I want to now announce actually the next conference. So the 4th International Conference on Global Food Security, Dr. Patrick Caron, he's the chairperson of the UN High-Level Panel on World Food Security, and I'm going to ask him to come and say a few words.
Thank you, Lisa. Ken, you want to come with me? Well, while Ken Giller is coming, I just would like to make a preliminary comment. First, I'm very happy that we were here in Africa. I'm so happy. Not only because I love Africa, but also because I'm truly convinced, and all the data, all the evidence showed it, that food security in Africa will be important for Africa per se. But what will be designed and written in Africa in the coming decades is the future of the planet. The future of the planet will be crafted here in Africa. So having this conference here was just marvelous. Second, when a conference comes to an end, there are 3 options. The first one is to celebrate. And really, I would like to, together with the previous commentators, to really greet and thank the University of Pretoria, University of Cape Town, thanks the Center of Excellence and the NRF, and thanks Elsevier for this wonderful moment that we all have together. Bongi said we have a treasure. I truly believe that, and I think if you can join me to make one more applause for all these persons. The second reflex is to relax and to go to the beach or to go with grandchildren, children or friends, and we enjoy very much this moment, so it's your turn to enjoy it right now. And the third reflex is to cry, because we will all leave and have our flights and separate just in the moment where there was some connection that might be interesting. So about connection and looking at the future, we have made a proposal, Wageningen and the French Institute based in Montpellier, to host together the next conference. I looked at Google, Pretoria and Cape Town, it's 1,300 kilometers. Wageningen and Montpellier, it's 1,100. So it's feasible. We can do it together, and we propose and suggest to host the next conference together in Wageningen. Well, for me and for us, in Montpellier. In Montpellier. And, in Montpellier. Sorry. And then the next question is when. Please don't book your plane ticket just after this conference, because we don't know exactly when. It might be in 2 years' time, just the end of 2019, the beginning of 2020, or a bit longer, but you will very quickly know about it. But much more important than that, it's not one more conference. It's not one more conference. We are looking at it as a journey. It began in Wageningen, it went to Cornell, we are now in Cape Town, next one in Montpellier, hopefully there will be next one. And the idea is how to build this trajectory, how to make this treasure that you witnessed here alive and prosper. What's the objective of such a conference? How to build connection, how to learn from each other, how to feel like, of course, we don't agree many times. And you've seen that in the sessions, and you want to rush to cafe to discuss. But that's exactly what's the heart of being together here. It's also to understand why we disagree, what are the controversies, formulate new research questions, explore new research questions, have young people with us for both having them trained, but also for questioning and provoking the oldest persons. So we will continue with the journey. I have some ideas, the link between local and global, how to make a public good out of different interests, and so on. I will not make a list because that will not be my personal decision that we will have to construct and to build in the meantime what we will be offered. But for that, first of all, come from animal science and I am a bit a ruminant. So I have to digest everything I've seen. I'm slow. I have to digest everything I've seen during these times. And I'm quite sure that's the same for every one of us. Not only you didn't see everything, but we have to come that, and that would be a request that after this, we really take stock to build the next step all together. So we will have this work, prepare the work, look at what are maybe the most burning issues we should look at during the next step of our journey, and already imagine that the journey will not stop in Montpellier and have a further way. For the next conference, it will be then chaired by one person in Wageningen and one person in Montpellier. I might be the one in Montpellier, and Martin van Ittersum might be the one in Wageningen. And well, this is also within the spirit of having this future together to address this issue that brought us here. Thank you very much. I don't know if, Ken, you want to?
Yeah, I'd just like to add, I mean, it's been a real pleasure and a privilege to be here with you all. Thanks, my personal thanks to the organizers here. We will be getting, I understand, a questionnaire to get some feedback on the conference. That's really important to us moving forward. This is the third time the conference has been held. I think it has been a great success, a real learning moment for me as well. And I hope that we can see you all in Montpellier when, well, we're not sure exactly when, but in about 2 years' time. So thanks very much.
I just want to say, Patrick, we were challenged with who should be in the room. The previous, or the last session made it very clear who should be in the room, so that could be part of your strategy. Also, I just want to mention that we have an international, it's the second International Food Safety for Food Security Conference that will be held in Johannesburg. It's a partnership between University of Johannesburg and University of Pretoria, and also the ARC, and we actually got about 5-6 partners, and that's in October, so also another important event. I now want to announce the, and actually ask my colleague, Professor Julian May, to come forward to introduce the UNESCO Chair in African Food Systems and to say a few last words.
You'll be delighted to know that I am the last speaker, and that unlike my earlier presentation, I can be quite quick at speaking. The first is to announce, take the opportunity of this conference, this very important conference, to announce the launch of a new UNESCO chair that was awarded in October to the Center of Excellence. It is the UNESCO Chair in African Food Systems. It's a partnership at this stage of universities in South Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Namibia, Algeria, and Ghana. The idea of the center, of the chair, is to serve as a convening center to be able to link together researchers, whether in agriculture, health, informatics, statistics, or whatever else, who feel that they are concerned with understanding better the African food system. Like most UNESCO chairs, the chair will not do research itself. It will operate through others who are doing research, and rather will try and bring together networks that can support research in the African food system. We will also be encouraging the establishment of a food security lecture to be held at the participating universities each year on African Food Day. I'm pleased to say that the first network to be linked to the UNESCO chair is the Young African Researchers in Agriculture and Land. It's represented here by the chair. Sarah, could you just stand up? The president of the network is here. This network currently spans about 30 countries in Africa, and it was specifically created as a way of linking together young African researchers who are looking for ways of mentoring one another, of linking up to one another, and being able to advance their careers. So if there are networks here, if there are young African researchers here, talk to CIRIAC. They're building their membership extremely rapidly, and I'm pleased that they are going to be associated with the chair. Thank you, CIRIAC. That leaves me just to do the thank yous. So Dr. Aldo Struber gave me a list of thank yous to read out. It's a quite short list, and I looked at it and I thought, well, there's a few missing here, including Aldo himself. But I think a huge thank you has to go to Lisa Corsten. She has carried the weight of this, of organizing this conference. She's done it with charm, as always. She's done it with intelligence, as always. And it's been an absolute pleasure to work with you once again, Lisa. Frans Swanepoel was the program chair. I think Frans had absolute foresight in how he designed our progression, starting on Monday when we started talking about production and working through the different stages of food creation until we eventually wound up with a predominance of issues around the utilization of food today. So Frans, in addition to that, I was really struck at the care that he took to make sure that throughout the conference, people from Africa were represented here as chairs, as discussants, as leaders, and in particular, I was really struck by the fact that Frans took such care to make sure that there was a gender balance in terms of who was involved at that level. So Frans should be acknowledged for that. Aldo chaired each of our meetings, always making sure that we ended in time, also being able to leverage an additional funding. We had an international advisory committee. I'm not going to go through all their names, but just to say, again, thank you for that committee. That committee, in a sense, is the continuity between conferences, and it's been renewed now, and it will also continue to serve as the way in which we see the links between the different conferences. Fellow colleagues on the program committees who then read through the more than almost 1,000 abstracts that we received to be able to select papers and presentations and make that very difficult choice of which to accept and which not. The Elsevier team have been remarkable. It's a big team. I'm not going to go through all their names, but I think we particularly have to just acknowledge the leadership of Marie Claire, who has had to deal with, at sometimes rather cantankerous South Africans, as we've raised issues, and now we've attempted to micromanage down to the detail of what snacks should be served during the breaks. Willeke de Bruin has been a quiet force in the background, making sure that things have been on track. Earlier, Willeke was also working with Joanna Penny, a visitor from Australia who worked to be able to keep that team going. And Desiree Holtzman is also on the Pretoria team. I must acknowledge my colleague, Ms. Locha Makwela. People may not be aware that behind the scenes there has been a continual flow of information from this conference. Several times people have asked, who's not in the room, how are we reaching them, how are we connecting to farmers? Well, it was a very conscious strategy to be able to do that. We've had television interviews about this conference, radio interviews, media coverage, and an absolute continuous barrage of tweets, blogs, and everything else. So that also has to be acknowledged. With that, it's over. Thank you. Go well. Hambagashi.
I just want to say a woman always has to have the last word. So Julian, I'm afraid Sandra is going to have the last word. So thank you.
We'll take only a minute or so. Thank you. So on behalf of Elsevier, I would like to thank all our delegates, all the speakers, poster presenters for attending this third International Conference on Global Food Security. I hope that you enjoyed the conference and that you will, and that we will see you again in 2 years' time in Montpellier, France. So not Wageningen, Montpellier. And I also would like to thank our sponsors and exhibitors for supporting this conference. And we would not have been able to run this conference without the many volunteers that were around here during this week. So thank you to the volunteers as well. I would like to thank the International Advisory Committee and as well as the Program Committee for the inputs and help during the organization of this conference. And I would particularly like to extend my gratitude to the local organizing committee, they're here, and their teams. They have worked incredibly hard and have put many, many months in this organization. And I would like to thank you for organizing this. And it's been a tremendous week and a wonderful conference. Lisa Kosten, Frans Swanepoel, Willeke de Bruin, Desiree Holman, Julian May, Aldo Strudel, and I also want to mention Loga Makwela and Melody Mens. Please give them a warm applause for their hard work and tremendous work they've been doing. I guess we end the conference. Thank you for attending. Oh, we have a small gift. For you. Rijksmuseum agenda.